When you think of the Sith, you typically associate violence with being one of their core tendencies, one which is not only encouraged but is actually sought after, especially in potential apprentices. However, there was a time in the training of Darth Sidious where his own penchant for violence greatly concerned his master Darth Plagueis. Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. We've been waiting for you. Every young Sith has to go through the process of learning to harness their anger. For some, it has to be goaded out of them. For others, it's a matter of learning to use the anger that they have. But Sidious was a rare case in which his anger and bloodthirst was already on a level that exceeded where most Sith start, and it was so potent that Plagueis had to give him a lecture on control. While this feels counterintuitive to the entire doctrine of the dark side, there was great wisdom in the words of Plagueis, wisdom that Palpatine would use to achieve ultimate power one day. So join us as we open yet another holocron and discuss how Plagueis was both greatly pleased and greatly concerned with Palpatine as his apprentice. A bit of backstory is definitely due for this topic, and everything comes from the Legends novel Darth Plagueis. When Plagueis found young Sheev Palpatine, he was living as an aristocrat on the world of Naboo, his home. When he was born to House Palpatine, his father recognized immediately that he was not normal. As an infant, he was described as having a strength far too great for his size, and a quote from his father said that abnormality seemed to follow the boy everywhere. In order to not have his family seen as freakish, Palpatine's father Kasinga made copious amounts of money in order to cover up his son's strangeness, so that the Jedi would not come asking questions. For years, Kasinga Palpatine was ashamed of his son, and went out of his way to keep Sheev in a caged life. Sheev Palpatine was a beast at heart, something both he and his father would later acknowledge. But rather than having the beast within him tamed through proper training, it was caged, starved, and abused, making the beast feral and ravenous. It was something that Palpatine kept hidden from everyone, compounding this bestial nature with his lack of any regard for morality or a rule of law. Anytime the young Palpatine got in trouble or caused mischief to get his father's attention, the Patriarch of House Palpatine simply paid people hush money and kept his son out of prison in order to save face, never out of love. And so the boy learned from a very early age that if one had enough money, influence, and power, that they were above normal beings. But throughout the boy's childhood, he grew to hate his father, and his father in turn grew to hate him. But this wound would fester until the day that Darth Plagueis found Palpatine as a young college student of Naboo, Theed University in fact. At first, Plagueis used him as a pawn for a political game, but soon he discovered that he was powerful in the Force, making him an excellent potential student. But what he needed was to get Kasinga Palpatine out of the way first, both for his own political plans, as well as to liberate Sheev to do as he pleased. And so Plagueis would tell the young Palpatine an embellished story about how he had convincingly caused the deaths of his own family members, in order to inherit a fortune that he now possessed. This all had the intended impact on the boy, as the seeds of murder were now planted in the young Palpatine's mind. On one fateful day, that seed would take root. Disliking Plagueis' influence over his son, Kasinga organized Palpatine to be shipped to an off-world school, one where he had had no contact with the outside galaxy. Now enraged by this, Palpatine confronted his father and had yet another heated argument. However, this time their venomous words became actions, as they admitted to one another that they had always hated each other. Palpatine pushed his father far enough for the man to actually make a move to strike his son, but before he could, the power of the dark side was fully unleashed in the young boy. Palpatine would go on to commit patricide, matricide, and fratricide, executing his entire family with nothing but his raw, unbridled power in the Force and his bare hands. After in a panic, he would contact Darth Plagueis and tell him what had happened. The Sith was overjoyed that his manipulations had taken root, not only because Palpatine was now free to become an apprentice, but because he had already taken the first steps into the shadow of malevolence. Getting him to unleash his rage was now no longer an issue, and once Plagueis revealed his true nature to Palpatine, he inducted him formally into the Order of Sith as his apprentice. From that point forward, Plagueis would use the murder of Palpatine's family as a way to push him further. Plagueis would force the boy to relive the memory over and over again, putting him through extreme training and even torture sessions. The intention was to burn all of the guilt away from him, to make the act itself something that was visceral, important, something that Palpatine would see as normal to achieve his goals. But in this training, Plagueis noticed just how potent that rage and bloodthirst was within his new pupil. On one occasion, the boy lunged at his master like an animal, his nails outstretched like claws. He had been thwarted by a simple Force illusion, and never so much as touched Plagueis. And although the Sith Lord would nurture this desire in his apprentice to kill, he began to understand that the beast within Palpatine needed to be channeled appropriately, and was in actuality very dangerous to even the Sith. During one of these torture training sessions, Plagueis had Sidious crawling all over a frigid tundra, while Plagueis continually lashed and burned him with his lightsaber. Sidious asked his master how long it would take him to learn the truth of the dark side, but Plagueis answered slowly that it would be difficult to tell. As a human, he had very few physical strengths, his senses were weak, and his body wasn't meant to withstand real punishment. The apprentice then asked his master if he had any strengths at all, to which Plagueis responds, "You have the Force, my apprentice, and the talent to lead. More, you have the bloodlust of a serial killer, though we need to hold that in reserve unless violence serves some extraordinary purpose. We are not butchers, Sidious, like the Sith of the past. We are architects of the future." Plagueis begins to explain the true nature of the Rule of Two, how they are differentiated from the Sith Lords of old. While violence and anger were things praised by the Sith, the direction of those traits had to be changed. They weren't going into battle wearing armor and wielding lightsabers against the Jedi, nor were they conducting grand rituals with an audience of thousands of slaves and sycophants. The Rule of Two were politicians, bankers, and members of the elite ruling class, those that had infiltrated the very bureaucracy of the Republic itself, infiltrated its veins. They were existing right under the Jedi's nose, and had to hide their true nature until the moment to strike was perfect. There were moments when the Sith were able to reveal themselves, to use violence to serve their ends. Plagueis would have to defend his life from assassins. Sidious would need to get revenge on the men who were sent to assassinate his master, and Plagueis would do so again and again in order to kill any political enemies. In these circumstances, violence served their ends, but by and large the animals within them needed to be carefully restrained, lest the Jedi sense the darkness growing around them. This was why Plagueis took 10 full years to train Palpatine before letting him get into the public sphere. Palpatine had to learn to temper that bloodlust, to keep it carefully hidden within. Not to mention, as Plagueis said, they were not simple butchers. They no longer needed to hack up their enemies in order to win. They could destroy their enemies in many different ways now, such as manipulating the opinions of the masses, or even directly targeting the economy of the galaxy itself. This was the new form that the dark side had taken, one of secrecy. Palpatine would remember this lesson for the rest of his life, and would keep his true power hidden. Becoming Chancellor, he eagerly awaited the day where he could show his true power to the Jedi Masters. Until then, he tolerated being in their presence, and relished in the fact that his immense potential was going right underneath their noses. But the days of bombastic displays of power were not entirely gone. Plagueis knew that keeping this bloodlust in reserve would have many benefits, and this was a lesson that he passed on to his apprentice as well. In Sidious's own writings in the Book of Anger, he describes the practical benefits of hiding your rage. He would, in essence, liken it to refining it like a fine wine, letting it steep and stew, roiling within your soul like a storm waiting to be unleashed. And when you do, that pressurized and refined rage comes out in a godlike display of power. This is what he writes. When the Force is sensed and moved by emotion from the very center of the body and meditated from the lower vital centers of the being, it acts with the destructive power of a storm, the savagery of a beast. Anger is the most potent catalyst of this kind of power, and anger that becomes rage when channeled through the vital gate in the center of one's body can unleash absolutely unstoppable potency through the body itself. Add the exquisite control of a fine intelligence standing watching over the anger, and one has aggression that can kill with precision, crush cartilage from afar, or murder opponents from a great distance. I have learned that anger and will joined together are the greatest power. I have learned to meditate anger and will with clarity and precision, and I have learned to open the hidden reservoirs of dark power. Anger concentrated by will in the vital center of the body creates a portal through which vast energies are then released. This is the dark side. This practice of willpower holding back and channeling anger goes all the way back to Darth Vitiate, one of the Dark Lords to use this technique and gain more power before Sidious. Sidious would learn from Vitiate, his master's teachings as well, to make his own unending rage a well of power. Sidious attempted to teach the same technique to Vader, telling him to treat his anger like a precious resource, not to waste it on Imperial officers that displeased him. But Vader would not learn this concept the same way that his master had. It was of great concern to Plagueis that his apprentice's bloodlust could be tempered in this way first. Not only was it the key to the hidden power of the ancients, but it was important to Sidious's penchant for violence not disrupt the new ideology of the Rule of Two. This was the great lesson that Sidious learned, and this is when he truly became a member of the Rule of Two lineage. But the fact remains, Sidious's anger concerned Plagueis for a very long period of time, 10 years. I love hearing the lessons from refined Sith Lords like Plagueis and like Sidious. It is good to remember that being a Sith and using the dark side isn't just about cutting loose and killing everyone all at once. And while this is the quick and the easy path, there is still nuance and finesse to its technique. Just like how there is a right and a wrong way to use the light side as well, there is a correct and an incorrect way to use the dark side as a Sith. Or perhaps we should say, an effective and an ineffective way. The dark side touts that it grants power, but there are better ways of going about it which yield the best results. And so even though the instinct is given to every black-hearted inclination, the most powerful Sith Lords teach that by disciplining their rage, that by letting it simmer, that by refining it, that is where true power in the dark side is held. But anyway, lore junkies, we do hope that you enjoyed this little deep dive into Palpatine's own training years. We typically think of him as the all-knowing Sith Master, and so it's always a great time to revisit the time when he was an impatient apprentice, still learning the ropes of the Rule of Two. But as always, let us know your thoughts on this subject in the comments down below. We love hearing from you. And as always, thank you for joining us today in the archives, and may the Force be with you.